Some women do not realize the moment their story changes. It is not during the breakup, the argument, or the unanswered message. It is in the quiet. In the moment he pulls back, not with words, but with distance. And suddenly the question rises like a voice you can no longer ignore. Why does his silence feel like a rejection of who I am? This question is not a weakness. It is awareness. Because when a man ignores you, the mind wants to fill the empty space with meaning. The silence feels like an evaluation of your worth, a measurement of your value, a verdict on your desirability. But Carl Jung's psychology suggests something far more shocking. Silence does not always reveal strength. Sometimes it reveals fear. Sometimes it is not confidence, but avoidance. Not power, but a hiding place a person retreats into when they cannot handle emotional accountability. Think about how often silence is treated like dominance. The quiet one seems in control, the distant one appears unbothered, the one who responds slowly looks harder to reach. Society rewards the person who speaks less, as if withholding communication is a sign of superiority. But what if silence is not the mark of someone who is above emotion, but someone who is afraid of it? What if the pause is not depth, but delay? What if he is quiet, not because he holds power, but because he has no idea how to meet you at the level you live? In Jungian terms, silence can be a defense mechanism. A person who pulls back may not be rejecting you, but protecting themselves from their own unprocessed feelings. Distance becomes a shield. Lack of response becomes a strategy to avoid being seen. The problem is not that you are too much. The problem is that he may not know how to handle enough. Your clarity, your emotional maturity, and your desire for real connection might activate his unhealed parts. Rather than confront them, he steps away. And here is the part many viewers never consider. His silence is not always about you. It is often about what he cannot face within himself. When he vanishes instead of communicating, when he leaves questions hanging in the air, when he lets you guess instead of telling the truth, he is not proving strength. He is proving avoidance. The silence is not rejection. It is a mirror reflecting the very thing he is unwilling to confront. This is where everything shifts. Instead of asking, "What is wrong with me?" a new question emerges. What is happening in him that he cannot name? Instead of shrinking into self-blame, you step into emotional clarity. Instead of interpreting the silence as a wound to your value, you see it as information about his limits. This is how power returns to you, not by forcing answers, not by chasing, but by understanding the truth. Silence is sometimes the loudest confession a person can make. His silence is not a judgment of your worth. It is a map of his fear. It reveals where his growth has stopped and where yours has begun. There comes a moment when silence stops feeling mysterious and starts feeling manipulative. Not because he spoke any cruel words, but because his absence became the entire conversation. Some men pull away not out of strength, but out of assumption. They believe that no matter how long they go quiet, no matter how slowly they respond, no matter how little effort they offer, the other person will still be there. They believe your patience is endless. They count on your questions. They assume your heart waits in the doorway of the last text message, hoping something will change. In real life, this shows up in small moments that feel bigger than they look. You unlock your phone and reread what you sent, trying to figure out which sentence felt wrong. You start a new message, then erase it because you are afraid of looking needy. You keep checking to see if he viewed your story, hoping it means something. You stop yourself from reaching out, but your mind keeps circling back. This is the emotional labor nobody sees. the waiting room of silence, the hallway where your value starts to feel negotiable. Carl Jung would say, this is where projection begins. The mind takes silence and fills it with stories. Maybe he is busy. Maybe he needs space. Maybe you said the wrong thing. Maybe you are expecting too much. The brain tries to protect you from disappointment by making excuses for the behavior in front of you. But here is the painful truth. Sometimes he is not busy, overwhelmed, or confused. Sometimes he is simply relying on the belief that you will stay, that you will not walk away, that you fear losing him more than he fears losing you. This assumption creates a false sense of safety. If he thinks you will wait, effort feels unnecessary. Communication feels like a favor instead of respect. Presence becomes casual. Consistency becomes optional. He does not feel the need to show up because he believes the emotional work is already done for him. The dangerous part is that waiting can feel like loyalty, even when it is actually self-abandonment. The turning point often arrives quietly. One day, something in you shifts. You stop refreshing the screen. You stop rehearsing your sentences. You stop performing patience to prove you are understanding. You stop waiting in a way that costs you your dignity. Instead of asking why he is silent, you start asking why you are still accepting silence as an explanation. This is where emotional gravity reverses. When you stop waiting, the power dynamic changes. In 2026, your lack of pursuit becomes the loudest answer in the room. You do not have to argue. You do not have to convince. You do not have to beg for clarity. The absence of reaction speaks for you. The silence you once absorbed becomes the silence you now choose, not as punishment, not as revenge, but as clarity. Boundaries are not walls. They are instructions. They say, I am willing to connect, but not at the cost of myself. They say, I am available, but not replaceable. They say, I am here by choice, not by fear. Silence becomes self-respect instead of self-sacrifice. You do not wait because you are loyal. You stop waiting because you are finally loyal to yourself. And that is when everything changes. There is a specific moment in these dynamics that many people never notice at first. It is the moment when silence no longer feels like distance, but like leverage. Some men are not confident because they are strong. They are confident because someone else is questioning themselves. They lean on another person's insecurity the way a broken chair leans against a wall. As long as the other side holds, it all stays standing. As long as you fear losing him, he feels safe from losing you. In real life, this does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it is as subtle as shrinking yourself to avoid conflict. You tone down your needs to seem easier to love. You hesitate before asking for clarity because you do not want to look demanding. You tell yourself, it is not a big deal, even though it is. You apologize first, even when you were the one who was hurt. You rehearse conversations in your head, not to express yourself, but to avoid scaring him away. This is how self-doubt becomes currency. You pay for the connection with the parts of yourself you are afraid to defend. Carl Jung would call this a projection loop. He believed that when we fear abandonment, we hand our authority to the very person we are afraid to lose. It becomes an emotional equation. If he is calm, you feel safe. If he pulls away, you question your worth. If he is indifferent, you work harder to prove you matter. The problem is not that he is powerful. The problem is that your identity is sitting on a scale he controls with his behavior. This is where the psychological imbalance forms. When someone senses they can disappear without consequence, responsibility collapses. When someone learns that your anxiety will do the relationship work for them, effort becomes optional. It is not that they are superior. It is that you have been negotiating your value on their terms. This is not love. It is emotional dependency disguised as connection. And then something shifts. It does not arrive with fireworks or shouting. It arrives like a quiet sentence inside you. I cannot keep living like this. That sentence is the fault line. The moment you stop fearing the loss of him is the moment he begins to fear the loss of you. Emotional gravity reverses. He is no longer held up by your insecurity. He has to stand on his own feet, not on the trembling ground of your self-doubt. The path forward is not convincing him to stay. It is strengthening the version of you that once believed survival meant holding on. It is remembering the parts of yourself that existed before fear taught you to shrink. It is realizing that clarity is not a threat to the right people. It is realizing that boundaries are not walls, but doors that only open to those who can knock with respect. Your worth is not something he gets to measure. It is something you have to stop handing away. There comes a point where it becomes obvious that his confidence is not built on mutual connection, but on the belief that you are orbiting around him like a planet around a sun. He assumes that your attention, your patience, your emotional labor, your availability, and your loyalty are automatic. He mistakes routine for devotion. He mistakes your consistency for dependence. He mistakes your heart for a resource that belongs to him. And because nothing has challenged that belief yet, he assumes it will never change. In real life, this does not always show up through dramatic scenes or loud arguments. Sometimes it looks like he is expecting you to always reply first while he takes his time. It looks like he is assuming you will rearrange your schedule to adapt to his. It looks like he is showing up only when it is convenient, and assuming you will always be there to receive him. It looks like he believes that your world is small because he never imagined you could expand it. These are not always spoken words, but unspoken hierarchies. They reveal where he has placed himself, at the emotional center, above accountability. Carl Jung spoke about psychic inflation. When someone unconsciously believes they are more important than others because they have never had to question their position. In relationships, this inflation takes the form of silent entitlement. He does not need to ask if he matters because he has always acted as if he does. He does not need to offer consistency because he assumes you will stay even without it. He does not need to look at his flaws because your fear of losing him has been doing the emotional labor for him. This is not a partnership. It is a hierarchy disguised as a connection. And then something begins to shift. Not because you yell, not because you threaten to leave, not because you try to prove a point. The shift begins the moment you subtly start returning to yourself. You prioritize sleep instead of waiting for a message at midnight. You spend time with friends again. You take a walk alone instead of sitting by the phone. You focus on work. You rebuild your health. You remember the hobbies you abandoned. That is when the orbit changes. Emotional gravity adjusts. The center moves. This is the moment that challenges his worldview. The day you stop revolving around him is the day he must face himself without control or excuses. If he wants space, he has it. If he wants distance, he gets to experience it. If he wants to be unbothered, he now has the room to feel what that actually means. The silence he once used as power becomes a mirror he cannot avoid. He is no longer protected by your fear. He has to deal with what remains when you stop cushioning the consequences for him. And this is not about punishment. It is about clarity. Recentering your identity does not remove him from your world. It simply removes him from the center of it. It gives you back the air to breathe, the room to think, and the emotional ground to stand on. You are not creating distance to hurt him. You are creating space to find yourself. Because the truth is simple. A relationship that only works when you shrink is not a relationship. It is a dependency. The moment you expand back into who you are is the moment the truth reveals itself. There is a moment in certain relationships when the pattern becomes clear. His confidence is not self-made, it is borrowed. It is carried by the reassurance that someone will always reach out first, always smooth things over, always soften the sharp edges. Instead of learning how to communicate, he waits for you to rescue the conversation. Instead of reflecting on his choices, he waits for you to apologize. Instead of building trust, he waits for you to hold the emotional weight. Over time, this does not feel like effort or partnership. It feels like expectation, like the silent belief that you will always return, no matter how little he participates. In real life, this can show up in very ordinary ways. Maybe he goes quiet during disagreements, not because he is thinking, but because he expects you to break the silence. Maybe he avoids responsibility, trusting that you will explain on his behalf. Maybe he becomes distant, assuming you will chase clarity. These are patterns that feel small at first, but they create an emotional imbalance. One person becomes the repair system, the reassurance system, the support system. Meanwhile, he becomes accustomed to being chosen without having to earn the connection. Carl Jung often discussed the ego as something that can become dependent on external reinforcement. Here, that reinforcement is emotional attention. When his ego becomes used to being the one others adjust for, he may mistake interest for obligation. He may confuse support with surrender. He may believe that as long as someone continues to care, he never has to confront his own avoidance or uncertainty. That is where the weakness forms. His identity becomes tied to whether someone is willing to hold up the structure he refuses to maintain. But something changes the moment you stop doing the emotional labor for him. The moment you stop explaining what he refuses to talk about. The moment you stop carrying both halves of the connection. The moment you stop trying to prove you are worthy of basic respect. You are not being dramatic. You are stepping out of a role that was never meant to define you, and this shift is not loud. It does not require a speech. It does not require anger. It begins quietly, the same way the imbalance began, by recognizing what is happening. When you stop over-explaining, over-giving, and over-proving, he does not just lose attention. He loses the version of you that made avoidance comfortable. He loses the dynamic that allowed him to stay unchanged. He loses the illusion that connection will always be there waiting for him, even if he does nothing to protect it. That is the real turning point, the moment his distance no longer controls the direction of your life. Attention becomes a gift, not something owed. Validation becomes intentional, not automatic. Your care becomes a choice, not a guarantee. And in that shift, a new question begins to rise inside you. If someone only values me when I shrink, what would happen if I stopped shrinking? You do not have to answer that out loud yet. Even recognizing the question means something in you has already begun to change. There comes a time when someone stops recognizing who you are because they are still looking at a past version of you. They assume the habits that once kept you quiet will always hold. They expect the familiar patterns to continue. The unanswered questions, the waiting, the doubt, the shrinking of yourself to keep the peace. They rely on history as if it guarantees the future. What they miscalculate is not your feelings toward them, but the direction of your growth. In everyday life, this can appear in small, subtle moments. He may pull away and expect you to follow like you always did. He may ignore a message and assume you will try again. He may change the subject when things get difficult and trust that you will protect the moment instead of protecting yourself. He may speak in circles and assume you will interpret, translate, and understand. These are not dramatic events. There are quite a few assumptions that you will stay where he left you. But 2026 arrives like a shift in temperature. Not loud, not dramatic, just different. Suddenly, you are no longer rearranging your schedule for someone who refuses to make space for you. You are no longer waiting for clarity that never arrives. You are no longer assuming responsibility for both sides of a connection. You begin investing in yourself, healthier routines, friendships that build rather than drain, goals that are not postponed for someone else's comfort, and decisions that consider your well-being. Without announcing it, your life starts to expand where it once contracted. This is where misjudgment becomes his weakness. He may still believe you are operating from the same emotional blueprint as last year. He may think you are paused where he left you. He may imagine that if he steps back, you will freeze. What he has not realized is that the story has continued without him at the center. You are not becoming unkind. You are becoming clear. You are not abandoning anyone. You are no longer abandoning yourself. That is the difference. Carl Jung wrote that what we do not make conscious controls us. Once you become conscious of your worth, the old dynamics lose their power. Once you recognize the pattern, you cannot return to it without feeling the cost. Once you see yourself in a fuller way, you can no longer pretend the smaller version was your truth. Growth is not loud, it is steady. It is the quiet decision to stop negotiating with what hurts you. Here is the climax. 2026 is not the year he realizes your worth. It is the year you realize it. And the moment you realize it, the direction of the story changes. Not because someone else chose you, but because you finally chose yourself. That alone shifts the balance of the narrative more than any message, explanation, or second attempt ever could. Growth creates distance where confusion once lived. Boundaries create clarity where guessing once existed. Emotional self-respect creates space where overgiving once took place. And in that space, a new version of you begins to stand. By the time the story reaches 2026, the narrative no longer revolves around who stayed, who pulled away, or who responded to what message. It revolves around who you became while everything was silent. His hesitation, distance, or inconsistency does not define you. In Jungian psychology, relationships function like mirrors that show us what we must confront within ourselves, not tools that measure our value. Silence can reflect his avoidance, his fear, or the part of him that is not ready for accountability. It does not reflect a shortage in you. This is the shift that matters. You stop interpreting silence as evidence of inadequacy. You start seeing it as information. You stop trying to earn clarity from someone who refuses to offer it. You begin offering clarity to yourself. Instead of chasing closure, you create direction. Instead of trying to change someone else's emotional behavior, you change the terms of your participation. It is not punishment, it is self-respect. In real life, this can sound like decisions made quietly, but powerfully. Answering when you genuinely want to, not because you fear the consequences. Choosing conversations that feel safe and honest rather than draining or confusing. Paying attention to how interactions make you feel instead of explaining those feelings away. Acknowledging emotional patterns without blaming yourself for them. These are small steps, but they build a foundation that can hold the weight of the person you are becoming. Here is the heart of the message. He may ignore the message on your phone, but he no longer gets to ignore the value you hold in yourself. His reaction cannot decide your identity. His silence cannot decide your future. His distance cannot decide what you deserve. In 2026, your worth is not a negotiation. It is a fact you live from, not a prize you wait for someone to hand you. Jung believed that growth begins the moment a person stops abandoning themselves for acceptance. The moment a person stops shrinking to keep the peace. The moment a person says, internally or out loud, "My voice matters in the room." When that shift happens, the story changes. Not because someone came back, apologized, or suddenly understood everything. It changes because you stopped making your value conditional. So here is the final invitation, grounded and simple. Write down one thing you will no longer negotiate in 2026. It might be self-respect, it might be communication, it might be emotional clarity, it might be the right to feel safe, heard, or consistent in your own choices. Keep that one thing close. Let it lead you. Your worth is not up for debate. Not next year. Not anymore. If this touched something sacred inside you, don't let it fade into silence. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your presence here is not just support, it's resonance. And if you feel moved to give back, your donation becomes a quiet but powerful gesture that helps keep this light alive for others still walking in the dark.